Welcome to our upscale video. To open this one, I'd like to share a quote with you. When little people are overwhelmed with big emotions, it's our job to bring the calm, not join the chaos. That's what this video is going to be about. How do we handle those big emotions in those kiddos, or maybe even in ourselves, right? So I just wanted to give you a little bit of background on where some of the information is going to be coming from on this video. The information is based on a few different articles that I've read. There's a couple of them listed here, and there'll be another one further down in our video. And then, of course, just years of experience working with young children and learning about their big emotions and working through them. I've done this through children in my program that I've as through a work aspect and also at home with my own children. I also have background in pyramid model, which is a framework for development of social emotional skills and challenging behavior. Let's talk a little bit about the key point, the overall things to remember when handling big emotions. It's not about teaching our children that their emotions aren't important or valid, or that they must be hidden or suppressed, but it is about helping them find socially acceptable ways to express and deal with their emotions. Most importantly, in ways that don't hurt others. So that really encompasses a lot of what I see with children and parents. Sometimes a lot, or I shouldn't say sometimes, a lot of times, the way we handle emotions and the way we handle this with our children comes from the way that things were handled with us. And the reason being, even though maybe you didn't really like that it was handled that way, or you remember distinctly it not working for you or maybe making things worse, part of that is because when you get your emotions involved as well, you then start to pull from a brain state that is what you're pulling from is just grabbing at what was there, right? The foundation, they'll say, coming from the CD-ROM of your brain. So even though you know that's not the way you want to handle the situation or what's best, when we get to that state of mind, that's just what we're going to pull from and what we can do. And sometimes we run out of options. We feel like we know, heard different ways, try different things, but we don't know what else to try. So we kind of resort back to the things that we know well, or the way things were done with us when handling those emotions. So I would say that's one of the biggest things between all of the different experiences I've had and background and education is validating those feelings and how important that is. It doesn't mean that we're going to validate how they use those feelings. What we're doing is we're validating that they have the feeling, but it's just what we do with that feeling. That's a really big phrase that we use. Something else that I want to point out before moving on is that tantrums, what we have to remember about them, even though they're very high emotional, for us and the child, they can be a sign where that child has lost control. And so it could be part of just where they're at in their development and whether what they can handle within their development and their brain state, but it can also be a learned behavior. So sometimes that's the tricky part, right? Is trying to figure out, is this tantrum something that is developmentally appropriate and just working through, or is this tantrum maybe a learned behavior and something maybe I'm doing to maintain that behavior? So those are the types of things you can look at when observing your child having these big emotions. But the number one thing to be able to do during that time for you as the adult, as we said in our quote opening up the video, is you need to be able to stay calm. And that can most of the time be the hardest part, right? So what's really important as you are trying to examine really what is behind the behavior is, first off, making sure you can stay calm. And remembering that there's many factors at play. We could be talking about hungry, tired, sick, having a hard time, depending on the age of the child, things that are happening at childcare with other children, or maybe a relative is sick, not seeing mom or dad very often. So there's lots and lots of different things that come into play. And especially, it's probably not in that moment really what they are saying is wrong. Sometimes it's bigger things that we need to remember to look outside of the current moment. So this slide, I'm going to help you think about a little bit of how we can understand that emotion better. I feel that through my experience and my training that this has been one of the most powerful things and really changing the aspect of looking at a child and what their behavior is and attaching it more to an emotion, where I'm not looking at a child that's just being naughty or trying to irritate me and frustrate me, right? I am going to look at it from an angle of, I need to understand what is going on with this child and the emotions inside of them. So you kind of take more of a different angle of kind of being that investigator and wondering a lot about different things. They're not going to be able to express it to you very well. So you, again, need to be that person to help them kind of sort through it for them. So some of the things on here with an emotional outburst can come from a hard time coping with those emotions. So this is called self-regulation. So this is a developmentally appropriate thing. And for some of us, even as adults, we are still working through that self-regulation of emotions. So this also means that we can understand a little bit more of the child and where they're coming from with this. So even though we might have those same emotions and feel like we want to have an outburst, we're not throwing ourselves on the ground, but that's because we are the adult and we do have a brain that is more developed. So we just have to remember that that child is not at the brain state and the development of their brain to be able to handle those emotions like we can. So we're going to talk a little bit more about self-regulation as well. So handling these big emotions, AKA self-regulation. So those are kind of when we talk about self-regulation, that's what we mean. It's their ability to handle those really big emotions. And this skill can be taught. So that's the good news for you as parents, is that you can teach your children self-regulation. Sometimes what happens is there is brain connections and things that other things that get in the way. We talked about some of those other factors, chemicals in their brain, maybe certain foods or diets, sleep, things like that, that sometimes can get in the way of that self-regulation. But in general, it is a skill that can be taught. Emotions and self-regulation go through developmental stages. So that's really important to understand when talking about emotions. They're all going to happen differently. And so the last one, kids have to acknowledge the feeling of feeling overwhelmed before they can work through the solutions. So that kind of piggybacks off the bullet point before that. So when we talk about things that emotional and self-regulation going through developmental stages, we need to make sure a child is able to even acknowledge that they're feeling overwhelmed, identify those emotions they're having, those feelings, before they can work on the solutions. So sometimes what can happen is we might go into a situation with a toddler and we might start throwing out solutions and this is what you should do, when maybe that child really isn't even understanding the emotion they're having yet. So always be aware of that and really thinking about, is my child even understanding the emotion before I pull out different solutions that I want them to try. For self-regulation, it's all about working with your child through the infancy stage of co-regulation. So when they're an infant, they need you to regulate with them. So you're co-regulating. Then they'll move through the stage into language stage. This is where, as the parent, you come in handy. You can be their emotional coach. So this is a really interesting topic, and I actually will be doing a separate upskill video just on emotional coaching. So if that's something you want to dive a little bit more into, you'll have the opportunity to. So we have an example here of being an emotional coach. So it says, the next time your child is overcome with big emotions, coach them through I feel, I wish, and solution statements. So an example would be, you look angry because your sandwich dropped on the floor. You wish you would have had used 2 hands. Would you like me to whip up another peanut butter and jelly sandwich for you? So there's the solution. Now this may look different depending on the developmental stage. So speaking of toddlers, you're maybe just going to take off some of those. So there's 3 different points that they talk about in there. So maybe at first you're just going to say, I feel, or you feel. So we're really just going to be acknowledging the feelings that are involved with that and validating. And then it's going to be, I wish, or you wish you maybe would have done something different. The solution piece is maybe just going to come in a little bit later, or the solution piece may be what you as the adult can do to help them. So you're showing them what kind of solution you can bring to the situation. So again, if the emotional coach idea and concept is intriguing to you, we will do a little bit more and get more in depth with that on the next one. Another amazing idea for you that I would say is creating a calm down plan. So this is going to be a great way for you to help your child work through the emotions in a healthy way. And this is again for both you and the child. And the reason that this is important, actually having a plan and maybe even wrote down or maybe even print this off and have it, is not for the child who can't read, but for you as the adult, and to remind you, even when maybe you're getting in that situation that you are stressed out, it's been a long day, you're at home trying to cook supper, and your child is having a tantrum, and maybe even you are having a hard time. This is going to help you as well be able to work through those in a better way. So you could kind of maybe do it together with your child. So this is, these are especially helpful when to have a plan in place when you have a child with aggressive tendencies. Again, this is when things can get really heightened and you don't only have big emotions involved, but you have safety maybe of other children or yourself in the home. So this would be a great plan to put in place for that as well. And what you want to be able to do is support them in finding a way to deal with the anger that feels like it needs to come out. So again, what you're doing with having a plan is it's your way of being able to validate that feeling, which is very important. And how do we get that out in that acceptable way that is okay, instead of just keeping it in and suppressed? And again, this is another concept that I will be doing an upscale video on. So you can search in our other ideas or other videos of how to create a calm down space. So even if creating a calm down space as part of your plan is intriguing to you, that's something else that we will talk about. And we'll do another one on staying calm as the parent. So as we've touched base a couple times in this video, it is very important as the parent to do that. And maybe you feel like I can manage the child's emotions and aware of them, but it's maybe more my emotions that I'm having a hard time with. So we'll do another video on that if that feels like a good idea for you to watch as well and learn about. Wanted to give you guys a little bit, knowing that we have many parents watching that might have different ages of children. And so I wanted to give a little bit of a guideline according to the different developmental stages. And so this is another website that I found this information from. So when we look just at the infant stage of emotions and what that's like, all those emotions are pre-wired. For example, they may cry, and the cry may be to avoid something, a stimuli that they don't like, or it might be to move towards a stimuli that they do like, a food, a person, comfort, warmth, things like that. The self-soothing at this stage is very prevalent. So again, those babies, that's that Nook pacifier, those blankets, things that are really going to be self-soothing. So that's why they're doing those things, is because they are trying to soothe themselves during those times. A way to help them is that they love play songs. The Wheels on the Bus is a good example. So any types of those songs are very helpful in when a child is having a very hard time calming down. To be able to turn one of those songs on and for them to listen to would be very helpful. In the toddler stage, you can help them by using everyday opportunities to learn that emotions are okay. And this could be by talking to them about their emotions, or talking to them about your emotions and how you're working through different things that might make you frustrated, and what are you going to do about it. So they're really learning and watching you to find out how to handle those situations. Now it puts a lot of pressure on us, and that doesn't always feel good, but that's what we need to do as parents, and we can work on. A little bit more of the toddler stage, they really begin to make connections of certain emotions to certain situations. So a lot of those connections start to be made more for them. Little fun fact, the hardest emotion for toddlers is fear. So that is something for them that is the hardest to deal with. By 2, they can start to adapt some strategies to deal with certain emotions. For example, moving away from a situation or a person that is making them upset. So again, as an infant, if something's making them upset, they just cry. They can't move from that. But once they get into that toddler stage, they start to learn, and with our help of problem solving, they can start to learn what they can do to get away from those things, or to get help, maybe from mom or dad or the child care provider, things like that. So in other words, helping toddlers avoid de-stressing situations or distracting them. So big strategy for those high emotions in toddlers is distraction. And those are some of the most effective strategies in that social emotional or that emotional regulation for preschoolers. So emotional regulation is not just about expressing emotions in a socially appropriate way, or sorry, it is. That's what we want to be doing at this stage is when you're expressing those emotions and having those really strong emotions, how do we express them in an appropriate way that's going to keep everyone safe and to help them communicate across to whoever it is, what it is they need and what they're feeling. There's a 3-phase process that preschoolers are going to start to work through when we talk about that emotional regulation. This involves teaching children to identify emotions. So first stage, again, kind of like what we talked about with toddlers, start to identify the emotions, talk about emotions, all of them involved. Then they're going to help them identify what triggers that emotion. So you are feeling scared. What made you scared? So you're going to help them connect what it was that made them scared. And then you're going to teach them to manage those emotions. So it's a great 3-step phase that they go through. When we teach kids that their emotions are valid, we help them view what they feel as normal and manageable. And that is in itself a wonderful strategy. If a child is constantly feeling a lot of different emotions, that's what's going to make it really tough is if they feel like they shouldn't have those emotions. Many times in stories I could tell you about kids when they talk about them being mad and about that, they associate mad with bad. That being mad is a bad emotion. And that's something that I really, part of what I'm doing with this is really trying to promote any parents as possible to really help the kids understand that when you are mad, that doesn't mean it's a bad emotion. And it might not be that the parent necessarily has literally said that, but maybe it's something they observed from the parent, right? Maybe they saw a parent be mad and ended up in a bad situation. So they just start to make those connections, right? So it's amazing when you start to think about it and step back, how much connections they're making, especially at that preschool age with those feelings and how big they can be sometimes inside. We talk a lot about preschoolers and how maybe is it just a little feeling or is it a really big feeling, and how we deal with that compared to when it's just a little bit of feeling inside of us and when it's a really big feeling. And again, what is acceptable is a really big thing for those preschoolers, and how do we work through those emotions in a good way. Evidence suggests that kids pick up our emotions. So again, as we've been talking about this, a lot of it has to come back to us and how we are handling our own emotions in this situation, and that those exposed to many negative emotions are more likely to struggle. So again, just a child being around a lot of negative emotions it might make them more likely to struggle with a lot of those emotions as well. So I hope you enjoyed our upskill video on handling big emotions, and hope you were able to learn some more and get a little bit better grasp on that. And again, we're going to be doing a few more that will piggyback off some of the topics that we touched on tonight. So thank you.